We got Greg and then Cole and then Ian and Dave.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to beg everybody's pardon. I've been holding my peace on this for the past many months just because I wanted to see the process play out. Everyone has the ability to avail themselves of our democratic process. And so now that these are turned in and done and ready, I feel like it's an appropriate time for me to share my perspective. I guess first off, I just want to say I'm disappointed and frustrated with the state of all of this. And I think like a lot of the other 20,000 some odd residents who've been on the outside looking in at all of this, the question I have, and I think a lot of them have, is why the sudden need for all of this upheaval, especially since so many of the leaders of the Stop Prairie Village group actually served on this council and never felt compelled to pursue similar measures while they sat in these seats. As I've interacted with a couple of the leaders of this group and observed their tactics over the past year, my takeaway is this: one of two things has to be true about the leaders of this group. Either they have such a loose understanding of how the mechanism of government works that they've completely mismanaged this petition initiative to the point that they have overpromised and underdelivered for the people they asked to sign it. Or this same group is so well aware of how the mechanism of government works and that they co-opted the housing initiative as a political ploy to sow discord and discontent in our community as a means of trying to regain some political power after their preferred candidates were defeated in the past 2 elections. I can't tell you which of these is the case, but I can tell you is that most, if not all of them, would tell you they are frustrated, maybe even angry that I'm sitting here today. See, I wasn't supposed to win in 2021. My opponent did everything every other winning candidate had done in the past to win this seat. From how he ran his campaign to the number of votes that he got on election day, he did everything right. Nonetheless, I won this seat in a free and fair election by 14 points, and that ruffled feathers with a lot of the folks who have long held sway over this seat. I'm not apologizing for winning, but I said it because I set out to try the one thing this group never thought to do when running a campaign for city council. I focused on increasing voter turnout rather than just shilling myself based on partisan talking points to voters. And it worked. It worked really well. In 2021, Ward 5 saw turnout that was 17 points higher than the historical average. Now, rather than adopt that simple and noble effort, the leaders of Stop Prairie Village decided to double down on their previous strategy of using innuendo and conjecture to try and scare people into voting against their best interests, all while hoping no one would point out the blatant contradiction between their claim there was insufficient resident input on our city's comprehensive plan, while also pushing a ballot initiative that would undo the results of the 2021 election that had record high turnout. Now, specific to this housing policy initiative, many of my constituents have been misled into believing this all began with this council just 1 year ago. It did not. In fact, as I've met with former council members and city staff, a lot of these same considerations go back to the first comprehensive plan that was drafted nearly 20 years ago. But this most recent iteration of housing policy debate began a little over 5 years ago, right here in this room. By the time the ad hoc housing committee recommendations came before us in June of 2022, there had been a full 4 years worth of research, discussion, and debate on what our community should do about the ever increasing cost of living here in Prairie Village. Now, here's the rub. Nearly all of the leaders of the Stop Prairie Village group were on council when this discussion began. And for our sakes, it's all recorded and you can watch it through the city's video archive. And as a duly elected member of this council, I have watched every minute of those recordings to gain a better understanding of how we got here. It has been enlightening to see these same people invest a year's worth of time sowing discord and discontent around a process and a policy that they scoped, they defined, and they originally approved. For example, former Ward 4 council member Brooke Moorhead, who is one of the founding members of the Stop Prairie Village group, sat right here and on May 7th, 2018 said regarding the effort to build Village Vision 2.0 from Village Vision 1.0, and I quote, "I think we do need the mix, and I agree on the different housing options. And instead of spreading horizontal, spreading more vertical with multi-use, multi-tenant, taking advantage of those corners that are there next to parks and going up for millennials and seniors who are looking for alternatives. I remember out electioneering, that's what people 50 plus were looking for. I want to stay in Prairie Village, and we need to keep those. There's no reason we can't grow our population, grow our income base, and offer alternatives. But I do think we need to do more than just another revisiting of the first vision. I think we need to bring in concepts that are maybe foreign and a little different and refresh what we've got coming into Prairie Village. I'm all for this. End quote. Dan Runyon, another leader of South Prairie Village and former council member, in that same discussion, openly questioned whether the expense to collect public input on a revised comprehensive plan was worthwhile. He said to our contracted city planner, Chris Brewster, in that same meeting, and I quote again, "I guess I'm concerned about spending $50,000 to $80,000 and hearing back what each of us has voiced in terms of here's what, each of us sees, less density, more density, that sort of thing. And I'm hoping that, that's probably my chief concern, is that we pay $50,000 to $80,000 and hear packaged back in a nice presentation, basically bits and pieces of what everyone wants. And I would hope that we would get instead, I guess, a process to identify recommendations on where to go without specifics." End quote. That is exactly what we got from the Ad Hoc Housing Committee in June of 2022. So Dan and others have spent the last year defaming this council for working with an outcome he specifically requested. Also, the us and everyone he referenced in that statement were to his fellow council members at the time. So apparently it was acceptable to leave these administrative decisions to our duly elected representatives when they were the ones in office. Because I never heard from Dan as one of my ward representatives in the 4 years that followed that comment. Yet he purported to know well enough what I and many of our neighbors were thinking in terms of how to address one of the most complex and nuanced issues that our community has ever faced, to the point that his chief concern heading into the update of our city's long-term planning document wasn't the emerging trend of significant price increases and related appraisal valuations, but the fee related to collecting and managing input from our community. So the accusations from these folks that this council isn't listening or otherwise doing anything out of the norm is not only hypocritical, it is patently false. And just to be clear, everything you've just heard is called accountability. It is not an attack. So when they try to spin this as me attacking them, just know that's their way of trying to distract from an honest accounting of their actions and intentions. Now, most of our residents are not keeping up with all of this because they're busy with work, with family, and other individual interests. So diving into academic journals on the economic, sociological, and psychological conditions that are contributing to the current housing shortage is not exactly a pastime they're looking to take up. But part of what I do for a living is research and planning to anticipate movement and markets all over the world. So I've embraced this as an interesting research project to ensure my constituents have a better understanding of what's actually at stake. I pulled together a forecasting model based on Johnson County's revaluation reports dating back to 2001. I combined that with Fannie Mae's historical table of mortgage rates and the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics annual salary appreciation rates over that same period to gauge the pace of wage increases against the pace of housing price appreciation right here in Prairie Village. And it tells a story that has become all too familiar across local, regional, and national news outlets. The example I use with my residents in Ward 5 is that of a 3,300 square foot home, which is roughly the average size for a single family home in our ward. A family that bought that home in 2010 needed to have a household income of around $110,000 to meet the definition of attainable, which is to spend no more than 28% of their gross income on their housing costs. In 2020, same house, new family, needed around $160,000 to meet that same definition of attainable. By 2030, as you forecast this out, the trend line that we are on, the same house, new family will need approximately $470,000 of household income to meet the definition of attainable in our community. That's an increase of nearly 300% in household income from 2020 to 2030. So this assumes, this assumes a appreciation rate comes down to a more nominal, like 8 to 9% level instead of the 15, 20, and in some cases 30% we've seen recently. Now, some have said, hey, that's the market. Not everyone can afford to live here. But historically, home values in Prairie Village have trended in line with household incomes, meaning the composition of our community has been economically diverse. That trend has stopped. This new one began in 2015. So when the leaders of Stop Prairie Village have done over the last year, either through their ineptitude or their craven political ambitions, is obstruct yet another year's worth of progress on addressing this transformational issue in our community, and it's only accelerating. When the leaders of Stop Prairie Village tell you, just do nothing with our current codes and housing policy, what they're actually saying is they are in favor of this accelerating upward trend in sales prices that is putting Prairie Village out of reach for the people who have traditionally called this place home. And this is the fundamental question that our community can no longer afford to put off answering. Is the character of our community in the structures that sit on our lots, or is it in the people who live and work in those homes and buildings? Because doing nothing doesn't mean nothing will happen. We have been living with a do-nothing approach on housing for the past 15 years, and we know where it leads. Due respect to the neighborhood design guidelines, guys, but that is an aesthetic solution to an economic condition, and it simply has not and will not resolve the issues of persistent high sales prices, continued tear down rebuilds, and they do nothing to sustain or replace the smaller footprint housing that is being erased from our community. So far, we've tried everything from tax relief programs, grant programs, design standards to better balance the redevelopment of our housing in our community. The one strategy from our comprehensive plan that we haven't fully developed yet is where and how to restore and add housing supply. In 2019, our city staff inventoried our portfolio of available single-family homes, and we actually saw a decline of 174 units in single-family housing stock from 2010 to 2019. And the county's housing study also recommends that we aim to add 434 housing units across the luxury market and attainable price points by 2030. That's a net addition of 260 housing units over a 20-year period. In the scheme of things, this seems like a reasonable ask of our community in the midst of a historic housing shortage, and the clock is ticking. If we do nothing, then we are exacerbating the issue by constricting supply during high demand and suppressing population growth in the midst of a growing metropolitan area. Today, more than half of our community has household incomes at or below $100,000 per the Mid-America Regional Council's Housing Data Hub. But this economic diversity is already starting to tilt toward more and more households in the 150,000 plus range. From January to today of this year, the number of households reported in this dashboard that are at or below $100,000 of household income has already dropped by 2%. So make no mistake, the character of this community will be irreversibly decided by the people who sit on this council over the next 4 years. And if we do nothing to better balance our housing stock across the luxury market and attainable price points, then the Prairie Village of 2030 and beyond will look nothing like the legacy we've all been asked to preserve and protect. That's all I have.